If you were at the Hilton Valley conference last week, which had almost everybody important in tech, the reception was ecstatic for the administration for Howard Lutnick got a standing ovation. His view about the future of work in the United States was almost identical to Jensen's. Jensen gave a speech earlier in the day, and they did not coordinate, did not sync, and they literally were almost like verbatim.
Evan, one question for you. What's your view on the kernel that is the Democratic Party now and the path forward?
I absolutely am 100% convinced that if tariffs will be one of the dumbest things that's ever been done by a president in 50 years. I think candidates will run against it, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side.
This thing is so insane in terms of like the harm that will happen to Americans, is that you will see a political swing back in the same way that like Republicans swung to this like absolute insane populist. Democrats can do the same thing. I mean, we have the #2 polling candidate in the New York City mayoral race is an actual self-declared socialist. At some point, we have to admit that like China, and it's other countries too, but like China subsidizing cheap for us, if that cheap is not unique to China and is not in some like military supply chain, is actually a pretty good thing for growth in Americans. We're basically
like a tax cut. It's an enormous tax cut
paid for by the Chinese people.
Yeah.
Because I'm glad you guys found a tax cut you like. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Guys, thanks for doing this. Great to see everyone. Good night last night for our New York Knicks. I was telling these guys, Keith, before you hopped on, like that was the most, I think it like in the third quarter was like the most miserable I've probably ever been as a fan, just like sitting there, not enjoying the experience. And then the most like wildest ending that I think I've probably ever witnessed over the last, whatever it was, quarter and a half. Knicks aside, maybe we can dive in. I know we want to talk a little bit about healthcare. Zach, I don't know if you were saying before this, you wanted maybe to do some higher level political stuff. I don't know if there's any questions you wanted to pose to the class.
Yeah. No, I was just poking because, you know, I was excited to hear Keith try to defend the latest and greatest of the administration, but of the I call it buyer's remorse. Like, has it set in yet?
No, like everybody I know that voted for Trump is absolutely ecstatic, including every single person in tech who either contributed to his campaign or publicly endorsed him. We were all absolutely thrilled, like better than expected on every dimension. We were
which part? The
tariffs,
getting rid of the skilled immigrants, or
every single thing he's doing. Deporting illegals is exactly what we voted for. Getting rid of the federal deficit is exactly what we voted for. Stop funding left-wing organizations, both subsidizing in the U.S. and outside, exactly what we voted for. Stopping anti-Semitism in the United States, which has been bred by the elite universities. All of this is exactly what we voted for. If you were at the Hilton Valley conference last week, which had almost everybody important in tech, the reception was ecstatic for the administration for Howard Lutnick got a standing ovation explaining the justification and strategy behind tariffs. He literally did. His view about the future of work in the United States was almost identical to Jensen's. Jensen gave a speech earlier in the day, and they did not coordinate, did not sync, and they literally were almost like verbatim. So, like, there's these people.
No, I get it. I mean, like, praising dear leader is a very good way to curry favor and get what you'd like.
Had nothing to do with praising the leader. He had no idea that, like, Howard didn't even watch his speech. It was literally in sync about what is the future in the United States? What does the United States need to do geopolitically? What's the future of work in the United States? And all of the people who live in this New York bubble are just completely divorced from reality. Trump is dominating. There are these annoying federal judges. They're acting like rogue, petty tyrants, but they're eventually getting overruled. Every single one of them is eventually getting overruled. The DC Circuit started cracking down last week. Eventually, Trump's going to win somewhere between 95 and 99.9% of these cases. So we're like literally.
Write that down. Write that down.
How much money can we bet on Trump
There's
winning
no
his
chance
cases?
he loses these cases. These judges are acting like completely inconsistent with everything you learned the first quarter of the first year of law school, and everybody knows it. It's just a matter of time. Last week, the DC Circuit issued an opinion late in the week that undermined like 90% of the district court judges already. And so this is just a temporary inconvenience. We're going to have to fix some of this lawfare. they tried to prevent Trump from running for president. Didn't work. It helped him get elected. The stuff the judges are doing is just making Democrats more unpopular than ever. The Democratic Party literally has the worst ratings in in polling history, actually.
Trump's current polling is the
It's
single
great.
lowest.
No, that's completely false.
It's
That is
not
completely.
false.
It is false. Like the only people who say that are people who told you Kamala was going to win. Every single
no.
pollster. Yes,
No,
every
it's
single
not.
poll. It
His
is. Like, I
popularity
just
is
tweeted this. You
down
can look at my Twitter
materially.
feed. Look at my Twitter feed. Like yesterday,
Oh my God.
I exposed that every single pollster who called the election correctly has Trump very popular. Literally, he's up 5 points today in Rasmussen, which is one of the 3 polls that got the election right. If you got this election wrong, your ability to pontificate should be actually completely shut down. Like, just like Ann Seltzer from Iowa retired, Nate Silver needs to fucking retire. These people have no clue what they're doing. They're committing fraud on the American people. I'm actually thrilled that Trump is suing these people because they're trying to manipulate the American public opinion. Atlas, Rasmussen, to some extent, Emerson are about the only people who have any credibility to talk. Right track, wrong track, which is more important than a pulse than actually
Okay,
in
Keith, you
right
can't
track, wrong
filibuster.
track. Well, okay, right track, wrong track is the most important metric. It is at a 14-year high. 14 weeks in a row, Trump has increased the right track, wrong track voting. We have a lot of momentum, and we're going to continue it. And it really doesn't matter. The Democratic Party right now is completely irrelevant, to be truthful.
Yeah.
No,
So,
that
Zach,
by the way, that might be true. I'm not arguing. By saying Trump is doing a horrible job has nothing to do with defending the Democratic Party. These are not one and the same thing.
Well,
Also,
you have
by
two
the way,
choices. You do only have 2 choices. I saw your tweet, though. Maybe you should create a third choice. But right now, you either support Democrats or you support Trump. There's no alternative.
so Zach, you need to know that the polls actually are really good compared to what you think. The stock market is probably really up. For some reason, you think it's down. That, and Trump's strategy of having tariffs and then folding in 4 days with absolutely no deals was always part of the strategy.
We're imminently announcing a major deal with India. India has never had, so all of you know tech. There's not a successful example in all of our lives of a tech company from the United States succeeding in India. Not one. That is changing. Like this deal is very real. It's going to be signed and announced imminently. And American companies are finally going to have access to India. This is a very big deal. Auto companies, tech companies, like literally none of us have ever made money investing in India because India won't allow it.
I'm excited to see one of the 200 deals that he claims he's negotiating to be public. Leaving aside the like illegal immigration stuff, which I agree, like there's people who voted for that and that's what they're focused on. From the tech perspective, scaring away legal immigration, scaring away green card holders, these are things that ultimately will harm the U.S. in the long run from a talent perspective.
Tourism is
down. Everybody's scared. Like if you're not a citizen,
M&A is down. Stock market's down. Confidence among consumers is down.
Stock market's down depending upon what day you look at it. Today it is down. You're right. But tomorrow could be back up.
Consumer
it had 9
confidence
days in a row. It was up 9 days in a row, et cetera. So consumer confidence actually is really interesting. The most probably rigorous study is this University of Michigan one. And you see a complete disconnect. Like Democrats think, consumer confidence are like this and Republicans are like this. The average works out to be slightly down. I agree. But you see this interesting dichotomy.
My favorite stat, by the way, from today, if you look at like consumer spending front, is the largest percentage of people who pay just the minimum on their credit card bill this month. Right. Like,
no,
so
you're right. You're right about that. And Capital One has historically used that as the single best predictor for the economic health since like early 2000 or mid 2000s or 2008 at least. So it is a really good valid indicator. That said, there's a wealth effect there. When people read headlines about the market being down, it does drive some of that.
You and I talk tariffs and what we can shift to healthcare. But look, if the goal of all of it, and we'll go back to the basics, is he's actually going to use this to cut free trade deals across the globe that were better than before, even though most of the deals from before are ones he signed during his administration last time. Fine. But like, my favorite is him shitting all over like our Mexican and Canadian partners here from a trade perspective. He's like, this trade deal sucks. And you're like, the one you signed, dude?
The people who are importing fentanyl, absolutely.
I mean,
We are
That's
getting
not a
deals.
trade deal. We don't have a
It's
fentanyl trade deal.
No, well, it is because he's using the economic leverage. This is when I use the term economic statecraft, and Logan and I had a Twitter exchange about this. Is pretty revealing. Economic statecraft is using tariffs to achieve foreign policy goals. The number one foreign policy goal for this administration is stopping fentanyl deaths in the United States, which relates to healthcare.
Why
We
is
talked
that
about
the number one thing?
because
That's not true.
300,000 people. Because 300,000 people are dying. That's more than the Vietnam War times
shit
6.
about people. Dude, they
Why-
don't
why do
care
we
about
care?
people. They
Why
don't
do we
care
care
about people.
about the
They're cutting
Vietnam?
Medicaid.
Why do we care about the Vietnam War? Like literally 6 times more people are dying from fentanyl. We have to stop that.
First of all,
And
that's
it's an
not true.
intentional
They
strategy by Mexico and the CCP, and to some extent the Trudeau administration in Canada, to allow Americans to die. And
No,
JD
they don't
Vance is
care.
like,
They
JD
don't
Vance is like,
care.
no, we're
Okay,
just stopping
okay.
it.
Keith,
Period.
no
if
fentanyl
people-
comes from Canada. Why
They
are
don't
we,
come
why
from
are we-
It
Canada.
actually does. So let me walk you through exactly what happened. Like I know this.
Okay, hold on. They don't give two flying fucks about fentanyl. They don't care about fentanyl.
Didn't used to. It's really simple. It is really simple on the cartels. So when Trudeau took over in Canada, he changed the visa policy so Mexicans did not require a visa to travel to Canada. The cartels are smart and figured this out. So 20% or more of all the fentanyl coming into the United States since Trudeau is from Canada, because all you have is these Canadian mounted, police on their little horsebacks, and the cartels are just savvy. The new administration, even though they're liberal, has actually started a crackdown on this, and it has changed. And so the tariff threat has worked in getting the police the Canadians to monitor the northern border. But that change in the visa, where you didn't require a visa, allowed the cartels to exploit the less guarded northern border. And it did result in significant influxes of fentanyl. Sometimes Democrats, when they want to critique this argument, say, well, only 4% of the interdictions are from Canada. But that's the problem. It's only 4% of the interdictions because the border's unguarded. But Canada is doing a good job now, and they are trying to be serious about this. But this administration's top priority is stopping fentanyl deaths, period.
That's
Kevin,
what they're going for.
what's
Can we
your-
just talk for 2 seconds about the Republican history of caring about the lives of people once they're born? We have, let's just go back to this. We have gun deaths. Nobody gives
We
a
don't
shit in the
have gun
Republican
deaths.
Party.
Gun
Nobody
deaths.
cares.
Wait, no, that's ridiculous.
We don't have gun deaths?
Gun deaths are down by order of magnitude since the 1960s. Like your chance of being assaulted with a gun or killed with a gun is down like a literally order of magnitude since when I was born.
Great. I'm just like you can watch the news of
Or
all
we
the
should
mass
worry about,
shootings.
why don't we
But
maybe
I
we should
just love
take
that they're
over
like-
Illinois. Your chance of being killed in a gun is, because Chicago is very serious. Your
I'm
chance
glad
in New York is
they
pretty
care
low.
about. Let's see. They care about fentanyl because it's killing Americans, but they don't care about the guns that are killing Americans. Wait, they also,
300,000 deaths versus like
first
how
of all,
many gun
it's
deaths?
like
How
it's
many
like
gun deaths are there in a year? How many
I
gun
get it.
deaths?
it's like 300,000 cumulative over the period. Second of all, it's not even
so
about
50,000, 50
There
to
looks like
60,000
50,000.
last year.
50,000
Yeah.
a year. Yeah.
No, I
Yeah.
get it. But you know what else kills people? Heart disease and all these things. And by
Great,
the
let's
way,
fix that too.
you know,
I'm fine
which
with
by the way,
getting rid of
which my
coronary disease.
favorite Republican policy, because they care so much about people's health, is cutting Medicaid.
They're not cutting Medicaid. This is so false. They're cutting Medicaid to illegal immigrants.
No, they're
not
not.
cutting a single dollar. Yes, they are. They're not
It's
cutting a
in their-
single dollar. That's absolutely false. The budget proposal literally says if you're an illegal immigrant, you are not going to qualify for Medicare, and we're going to save money and we're going to spend it on
Okay,
actual Americans
first
who
of all,
vote.
Illegal immigrants don't qualify for Medicare in the first place.
Yes. But they've
Yeah,
been
like-
getting Medicare payments in most states.
They're-
Yes,
no,
absolutely. In
they do not.
California, explicitly,
No.
they qualify.
Medicaid, certainly. Okay. Medicare,
We're
no.
going to stop that too. Like the illegal immigrants should get no benefits paid by an American taxpayer, period. No exceptions.
Okay. Like the history of the Republican Party is not giving two shits about your health once you're born.
Yeah,
Once you're
absolutely.
born.
Why do you think RFK is cutting back on, like, why do people have healthcare problems with their heart? They're fat and fucking obese. If they would eat good foods and act like a normal person and get 10,000 steps a day, we would have significantly less healthcare
exactly going to get rid of
expenditures in the United States.
vaccinations. Get rid of vaccinations too to help.
We're not getting rid of
No,
vaccinations.
it's just like-
vaccinations have been generally
we-
quite effective, period. I agree.
Can we just
completely
admit,
agree with you.
Can we just admit we don't have to, like, why do we have to lie about it? They don't care about fentanyl. It's just a
course we
beautiful
care about it.
excuse. It's an
No.
excuse.
No, that's
It's
just
an
ridiculous.
excuse.
You should keep. Why don't you just keep voting for stupid Democrats? Because obviously you don't want to even try to learn why more than half the population wants to be a Republican. MAGA plus Make America Health is extraordinarily popular because everybody else in this city is lying to you. If you want to be healthy, the easiest thing you can do is eat protein and eat like a normal human being,
No,
like we
I
did in the
get it. And you know where
1970s.
obesity and heart disease are the most prevalent in the red states.
In the red states.
In the red
Yeah.
states.
Well, we can stop that. Well, at least I'm willing to stop that. The Democrats are like, "Oh, you're fat shaming people." I'm like, "That's ridiculous."
No,
Like,
fine.
if you
Like,
want
I
to,
don't like
you need to stigmatize bad behavior, and you get less of it.
So-
And you need to emulate good behavior, and you get more of it.
But why do the Republican states have much more obesity then?
That's a great question. But
Culture.
I'm happy to dig into it. What's your theory?
culture.
I
It's
agree-
like the,
I agree to some
the
extent to that.
culture of
Doesn't it correlate
The
pretty
South.
closely with like income too? I mean, poorer states.
In
Absolutely.
theory, but it's
Because
not that strong a correlation.
It's culture and economics, right? Like there is a culture of wanting to eat red meat and fried foods and things like that,
Red
which
meat
is more
is good.
prevalent.
Red meat is not bad for you. Like, I think that's a myth.
Kevin,
By
what's
the way,
your
the other
answer on it?
cheap food is also unhealthy,
Well, it's
which is
processed,
another
yeah.
issue.
It's typically extremely
Yeah.
processed.
Yeah,
in
heavily
lots of ways.
processed.
More importantly, I just like the fentanyl thing. We all know is a joke. He's
It's a joke.
using it
All right,
as
let's move off fentanyl. We were going to healthcare, which is where we wanted to end up. Kevin, real fast.
Wait. The fentanyl thing is a really important issue here because Keith is claiming that is the major area of focus for this administration. Trump hardly mentions it except when he wants to try and claim he got something and then got something that had already been agreed.
No,
Keith,
this is the key linchpin, as I mentioned a month ago, and it's in the public domain now, to the deal with China. This is the single linchpin of a trade deal with China is they are going to stop importing fentanyl, which has been a very intentional strategy. This is the reverse opium wars. And that it has been communicated at all the highest levels of China. If you stop fentanyl, we will back off on tariffs to a reasonable level. That's the linchpin. It was in the public domain a week ago. When I mentioned it a month ago, it was not yet in the public domain. But I know the people negotiating this, and I know for a fact this is true. 100%
when the
absolute
cost
certainty.
of living for the average American is about to skyrocket. Because remember, the tariffs haven't really hit yet.
Yeah.
That's the
No,
interesting thing. They haven't really hit yet.
Tariffs do not cause inflation. That is,
It's
it's
not
like you didn't-
inflation.
didn't you
It's
go-
not
it's like-
inflation.
okay,
It's not
okay.
inflation. It's the inflation of individual goods. It's the price of individual goods. And the reason it may not cause inflation
Supply
is
and
because
demand.
you have spending pullback, right?
Well,
Like
two
overall
things.
spending comes down.
Inflation is defined as the rate of increase. Tariffs cause a one-time price shock at best. Like they go up once. Let's say you have a 10% tariff from zero. It goes up once. It doesn't continue to go up every month. Inflation is the rate. It's a first derivative.
I'm not talking
a
about
static
inflation. I'm just talking
number.
about the price of things that people want to pay for
Mhm.
are going to go up because there is a tax on that.
Okay. Let's be precise. Things that people want to pay for that are imported from countries where there's a new tariff could go up in price. That depends
Will.
on the price
Will.
elasticity. First of all, the price elasticity. Not every good does the price shock get passed on to the consumer. Some get eaten by suppliers. Depends totally on the elasticity. Second, you assume that consumers do not substitute from a higher price good to a substitute that's cheaper, whether or not manufactured in the United States. They may even substitute to a good that's not exactly the same. So, for example, if the price of coffee goes up, I might buy a Celsius.
Okay. First of all, if the price of your competitor goods, like if I sell a substitute product to, let's say I sell whatever, I don't know what Celsius is, but Celsius to coffee. If all of a sudden coffee is more expensive, right? So my competition is now more expensive. And so people shift to me. Do you know what every business does? They raise the price of their goods to capture the margin difference. This is exactly why protectionism doesn't work. In fact, I'll give you a specific example. There's a really good one because I was in Argentina about a few weeks ago. And there's at some nice restaurant in Buenos Aires. We're ordering wine. And I'm like, why is the wine in Argentina so expensive? Like, it makes absolutely no sense to me because it's basically a country that has no money. Turns out for the last 20 years, they've had protectionist tariffs against imported wine. So domestic producers get protected against from French wine and Europe, whatever, California wines. And so what the domestic producers do, given they have no competition? Raise the price. Somebody captures that margin. The substitute goods get more expensive as well. Now, yes, will overall inflation slow because consumer spending pulls back and the actual money being spent pulls back? Sure. but that's like claiming you're helping the economy by shrinking it. That is not a solution.
It's just a tax.
Well,
It's just another tax.
It's a tax. And the only point I'm trying to make,
I agree.
is that
it's a
humans have
consumption
not,
tax.
normal Americans have not felt the effects of this tariff. And their belief of like, I care about fentanyl, not really, but if I think I care about fentanyl until all the things that I have to spend my money on get more expensive,
Or you can't get them.
the speed at which their care about fentanyl will go to zero is, I don't think there is a thing that will faster down. They don't care. They don't care.
Great, then your Democrat friends should be thrilled, but they're not.
Well, look, I'm not here to
they'd
defend
be
the
sitting
Democrats.
back and saying, "Go Trump, keep doing this tariff."
Let me tell you,
they're complaining and whining all the time because they know it's not going to work out that way.
Here's my
politicians
fear.
are smart people. They're about their self-interest.
Look, I'm with you on the Democrats, and here's my fear, and we can talk about, and this will affect healthcare. This thing is so insane in terms of like the harm that will happen to Americans, is that you will see a political swing back. And the problem, and the thing I am scared about, and we're seeing it, Kevin, in New York a little bit with the socialist mayor who's running, is that they swing in the same way that like Republicans swung to this like absolute insane populist. Democrats can do the same thing and basically swing back to Bernie. And that is the biggest risk to me, is like the swing is going to be bad. I mean, we have the number 2 polling candidate in the New York City mayoral race is an actual self-declared socialist. And that honestly, the only thing scarier to me than Trump.
The horseshoe theory of all this is there's some kernel of populism, and it's why the Democrats can't figure out how to. Keith, I actually disagree that they think it's going to work. I think it's that they actually like the policy on the Democratic side. Like, this tariffs is kind of a core Bernie AOC thing, and so they don't know how to criticize it because there's no alignment on what the issue is.
That absolutely is
true. I agree with that there are some interesting overlaps in policies between, let's say, MAGA and the hard left. I actually think that is throwing Democratic leadership.
It's like the collection of the worst ideas in America, all kind of like humbled together. No, I mean, look, like it's bad. It's bad. Like the guy running for mayor in New York, and this is honestly, obviously, I would take Trump over the socialist, to be clear.
Well, there we go. We have progress here.
One is like, I view Trump as like driving with a handbrake. You know, you're like, fuck this guy. Like, everything's like a little harder. The socialists are like, hey, we're taking your car and we're giving it to everybody else. That is a much worse system. But like, the guy's talking about rent control. This is insane.
You probably saw my partner Vinod's tweet over the weekend where he said like he'd prefer Trump over AOC, even though he doesn't like Trump, obviously, and was very public about it. I think there's some truth there, but I don't think that you're going to see that happen, because I think this economy and the economic leverage, like, so for example, energy prices are obviously decreasing. A major input to the cost.
The economy is shrinking for the first time. So
you may be right. Hold on. Let's come. There's 2 issues. One is, do prices go up, and then does the economy shrink? And they're linked, but they're not totally linked. So if energy prices go down, that offsets a lot of price increase. Energy prices are a major input to most goods and services in the United States, including like Uber, on down. And energy prices, this administration, are going to continue.
He doesn't have Trump has very limited control over global energy prices.
No, absolutely not. The U.S. has more energy, more oil reserves than anybody ever thought 20, 30 years ago. So if we drill, we are going to have whatever energy price we want.
The federal government doesn't control drilling in the United States. That is an insane statement.
No, it absolutely
doesn't. It doesn't. Drilling in the United States is driven by private companies. The federal government can control permitting.
The federal government was limiting it artificially, certainly in the Biden administration, almost surely in the Obama administration too. For environmental reasons, we could debate about the merits.
No, they're not preventing. No.
Do you know the price of oil is almost at the break-even point right now? Meaning, like, at $50, the cost of extraction of oil is break-even. I think the price of oil yesterday was $56. So the price of oil is getting so low that it may not be economic incentives to actually drill.
The price of oil. Sorry.
Let's talk about the weeds of oil.
This is just so wrong.
It's all wrong.
The price of oil is set by the marginal producer. the marginal producer, right? Because it is a commodity. And so that is really why it's globally said. It's like, that's why they have OPEC, right? Because if you overproduce by just a little bit, it drags the whole price down. The US federal government does not control drilling of existing oil wells, which is where the oil comes from, in the United States. They do not. They have an influence
It absolutely
over.
suppresses it.
No, they
It
have an
can't grow. It
influence.
can't easily grow it, but it can certainly suppress it. We stopped all
Okay.
kinds of drilling
Hold
under
on.
the Biden administration.
One last amazing point. Okay. In the United States, existing wells or where the oil comes from, the federal government controls permitting. Do you know which group is the most against new permitting of oil drilling in the United States? The oil producers. They don't want it. They don't want
Sure.
it because more oil drops prices. This is this whole energy abundance thing of like, oh, we're going to just like open up drilling. Who's going to drill? They don't want to drill because it kills the price of oil. Oil is a global commodity and it is not controlled by the United States. And that price will go up and down. Sometimes the Saudis will do us a favor and they'll overproduce and then the price will come down. Like, yes, but the idea that Trump or Biden or any of these people have any control over the price of oil is absolutely insane. It's just not true. Maybe 30 years ago.
Supply and demand.
Logan, why don't you just superimpose a chart? The price of oil in Trump 1, the price of oil in Biden, and then the price of oil in Q1. And you'll just see the correlation. It's just so stark, you don't need a brain to process this. Secondly,
also
we're
show the
adding
economy shrinking under Trump too and growing under Biden.
That's absolutely false, but that's complicated, I admit. So
it's false.
And then we're going to add advanced nuclear energy too, which various left-wing groups have opposed. This administration is committing to develop advanced nuclear energy, which is both good for society. Certainly lowers the cost of energy. Okay, great. We have awesome. This is amazing.
Levin, one question for you. We talked a little bit about the horseshoe theory, and you're I think the closest plugged into the Democratic Party in general. I'm curious, like, there's this abundance agenda. We've talked to Derek Thompson and, Ezra, they're out there doing this book tour. Then there's kind of this AOC Bernie tour and concert. I don't know exactly what it is. It seems like it's a rock concert that's going around the country. What's your view after, I guess we're 6 months post-election at this point? Like, what's your view on the kernel that is the Democratic Party now and the path forward around, like, what policies do you think actually have resonance?
Well, first of all, I don't think that both the Republican and Democrat, there is no party position on things. A candidate comes forth. Trump came up. He wasn't the Republican Party told him what to do, and he went and did it. So that hasn't happened yet, and it never does happen this early.
But the Democratic Party, to be fair, does tend to galvanize a bit more behind an individual in a more structured way going post, elections and stuff. I think we saw it with Hillary. We saw it with Biden.
No, we did not see it under Obama.
I think that's the exception.
The DNC takes individual positions roughly, but like they don't control.
I agree with Kevin. That a lot of people focus on parties and all these studies about what our policy should be. Both parties, for as long as I've been following politics, about 40 years, have galvanized around a specific candidate, and that candidate's preferences and views have infused the rest of the party. So Obama galvanized, Trump did, Reagan did. It's really around the candidate, not around this theory.
Or put another way, we choose the policies we want as a party by choosing the candidate who has those views that resonate.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so it will be a free market. There'll be 12 different candidates running, and we'll see what resonates. It also, look, we shouldn't forget that whether it was Trump or someone else, a lot of things you run on are against what's happening. Many things that Trump was saying, he just wanted to do it differently. And because I absolutely am 100% convinced that if tariffs will be one of the dumbest things that's ever been done by a president in 50 years, I think candidates will run against it, both on the Republican side and on the Democratic side. It just depends on, the only caveat would be, it depends on how quickly he folds on it. He did last 4 days when he put his tariffs in place, but, was super tough about it. He'll have to fold at some point because the results are going to, once it kicks in, we all saw the data last week, 35% fewer containers coming into this country. That means that either things are not going to be on the shelves, no factories have been built in the last 30 days that are going to replace those products. So I'm not surprised that we went into a down economy in the first quarter. It was faster than I thought. I think that'll continue in the second and the third quarter. So, and the Democrats will run against that.
Well, I mostly don't disagree. I will say, though, the tariffs against all countries at 10% are still in effect,
Hmm.
and the tariffs
Yes,
against
sir.
China are all in effect.
Yeah,
So
the Chinese tariffs are.
those are all live, like today.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yes,
He-
yeah, they
he
just
No, he
kicked
will
in.
fold.
He did suspend for 90 days. 4 days later, all the other tariffs. You're totally correct.
Yeah.
But a lot of the material tariffs are
Yes.
towards China, and those are alive.
No, we got lucky. We got lucky that he walked back most of the insanity, non-China insanity, back down to 10. Thank God, which is part of why I think you aren't seeing like the market react down 40% at this point. What is interesting is that you've got, and this is just on the politics side, you've got an election in November for Congress, and you've got what seems to be a baked, self-imposed recession, because as consumer spending pulls back, that just has to flow through the economy. They don't spend, that slows down revenue from the business side. Businesses stop spending, they lay off workers, and it takes just normal time for that stuff to cycle through. Like, you kind of can't accelerate it. And if that stuff is kicking in now,
Yeah, this summer.
roughly, you already see the consumer spending pullback, right? And you're already seeing it on the business side because you're seeing it in the marketing budgets. Marketing budgets are coming, are
What's
being pulled
interesting
back.
is it's actually
M&A
not
is down.
showing up
Everything is down.
in the credit card data yet. By the way,
It's not in the credit card data, which, I'm on the board of at least 3 companies that have superb credit card data. Consumer spending is not down yet. I
it
agree
is
that
in
it could
pockets though that pull back, like advertising. Ramp ran the report that's down, and some
Well,
of the
you
stuff
also
like
will see-
McDonald's, Starbucks. We're starting to see some pockets of it.
Tariffs are also a really weird self-induced recession, because you actually see like a blip of
Pre-buying.
spending, pre-buying. So
Mhm.
like it takes a little bit of time to flow through. The challenge is just like, even if in July or August or whenever he announces, trade deals with whatever countries he probably can't find on a map, like the recession is still there, and it
Mhm.
will take time to flow through.
there is no recession right now. Right now, there's no recession.
Correct. Yes.
So-
yes.
so
we are
it could happen.
forecasting. Yes.
Well, you may have seen the Federal Reserve, from Atlanta, which had been the most bearish, adjusted the recession plan. They had predicted a recession for Q2. It's now up to 2.4% positive. So all the same, Goldman Sachs revised their forecast, which had said there was going to be a recession, to there's no recession in Q2. So it can still happen. You guys may be correct. And I agree that if there is a real recession, i.e. more than a strict, you need like 2 or 3 quarters to be a recession. But if that happens going into the midterms, obviously that's not going to be good for Trump and Republicans. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think my Republican friends think it's going to happen. But, you're right that would cause significant vote changes. No doubt about it.
Goldman has it at like 45% or something like now.
Poly market's been hovering around 65 or something.
But they pulled out a Q2. They said Q2. They had predicted Q2, and now they said Q2 is going to be up significantly. So this is complicated, and it does matter also whether the Federal Reserve lowers interest rates. Like, if they keep interest rates where they are, the chance of recession is significantly higher than cutting by 1 or 2%. I think we miss a recession if the Federal Reserve acts properly. I think they should. I think all signs are there's no inflation. And there is job reports that are positive, which is a good thing generally for the economy. But the Fed sometimes holds back when they see positive job reports.
Let's see. I mean, like, this is when spend pulls back.
Yeah.
You have just a natural.
It's self-fulfilling.
It's self-fulfilling. We'll see how long it lasts.
You're right about that. Obviously, like, I agree, the principle is sound, but we haven't seen consumers pull back spend yet on the credit card data. Second, you're right also on the timeline. There's $6 trillion of commitments to build factories in the United States so far, but those aren't going to be live in 30 days, obviously. So there's a timing mismatch there. Even if the $6 trillion is perfect, it's not going to happen overnight. So I definitely agree that there's a window where the Trump administration and the American people are exposed if they don't handle
There
this
might be
exactly
$6
right.
trillion of press releases, but there are definitely not
No.
going to be $6 trillion of.
They're
I
not
don't
all
know.
there.
I don't know whether all
Like,
6
no.
are like legit. I'm not going to verify each $500 million commitment, but many of them are rock solid.
Keith,
Like,
all
for
they had
example,
to do was regulatory reform. They could have just shown up and reformed all the rules that prevent capitalism, like we all wanted. And then they're like, hey, we're going to do like everything but that.
no, they're doing that. They're definitely doing that too. So I think that's part of the issue with tariffs is you can isolate, and we talked about this, 6 weeks ago. Tariffs are a component of like a 5-pronged strategy, and you can debate whether they should be a component at all. but they're clearly going for energy price reduction, regulatory reform, spending reduction for the government spending. And, they're looking at this in concert as five
They're
prongs.
not talking about, they may be talking about a cut in mild, like a little bit of government spending, which, by the way, if you look at the budget proposal, is essentially all cutting Medicaid.
No, it's not. It's not. Well, let's walk through what
But
happened.
they're also, by the way,
let's
they're
not debate.
also
Let's not
talking
debate.
about extending the tax cuts
We're
and
definitely
adding new
extending it. We're
ones,
definitely extending the tax
which
cuts.
increases the deficit.
Yeah,
No, it
deficit's not
doesn't.
going to go
But
down.
that's fake. That's also fake news. Okay, let's decompose these and we can talk about which ones you disagree with. In the first quarter, government spending decreased by 5.1%. That's a factual observation. It's not a prediction. It's not a CBO scoring. It's actually just facts. Second, if interest rates come down or the 10-year treasury rate, comes down, the debt load, which is a significant component of government spending, will also decrease. That
You know
is
what else
something
will come
that is
down?
very
You know what
critical.
else is going to come down when you shrink the economy? Tax revenue.
Yeah.
Right.
Tax
Well, it
revenue
would.
also comes down.
Tourism revenue.
I definitely agree. 100% agree with you on that, which is why it's really important to do two things: lower interest rates and cut taxes. When people have more money to spend because they keep it, they spend it. This is true. Then the historical point, which we can debate, but
No, they don't.
Logan,
They don't.
the
Okay,
historical
sorry.
point
They
is
don't.
every
They
time,
don't.
yes, it is. Every single time this country has cut income taxes, tax revenues to the federal government have increased.
No.
Every
That is just
single
not true.
time from
That's
John
not true.
John
No.
Kennedy. Yes, Logan, why don't you publish some graphs?
Yes, GDP grows over time naturally because the economy grows, but the actual tax, no,
The
they
tax
don't.
revenues, yes, the actual revenues to the federal government.
It's
CBO
just
does not
factually not
score
true.
it. It is absolutely 100% true.
Did the deficit? So Reagan did that. Did the deficit go up under Reagan or not?
Let's just isolate. I said tax revenues have increased every single time we've cut income tax rates. Revenues. So okay, we can talk about the spending side because they're obviously both connected to the debt. Obviously they're both important. But revenues have increased every single tax cut in American history, starting with Kennedy, who's the first one to do it, Reagan, and Trump won. Revenues.
Now, look, like on a nominal basis, sure. Like, look, yes. Does the U.S. economy grow? Does the U.S. economy grow? You know what I can tell you? Tax revenue also goes up. You know when tax revenue goes up? On even and odd years. On Obama's birthday. Like there's yes, tax revenue goes up because the U.S. economy is naturally growing.
Because the American people, growth, it actually goes up because growth accelerates when you cut taxes. And so you get incremental, more money, absolute dollars, which is important. That's the whole benefit of cutting tax rates. A, families keep their dollars, which is moral. B, it accelerates growth, which allows you to generate more money without taxing people at a higher rate, which is the goal.
I am all for cutting taxes in areas where we can afford it. And the only way you can afford to cut taxes is if you actually cut spending so that you can pass the savings through to the taxpayer in tax cuts, which, let's be clear, is not what the federal government is currently proposing doing by like an order of magnitude.
Question: has the federal deficit ever gone down under a Republican president?
No, of course
No.
not, because they
Of
never
course not.
because they cut taxes
They
and they
can't
don't actually cut
manage
any
the
spending.
economy. Under Trump, it went up. Under Reagan, it went up. Under Bush, it went up.
You're right, Kevin, as stated. I'll concede you're right as stated, but the important stat, not the vanity stat, is deficit as a fraction of GDP. Because that's the load. It's just like your credit card. It's a fraction of what fraction of it is of your income or net worth or whatever. And under many Republican presidents, the deficit as a fraction of GDP has improved significantly. The last Democrat who made real progress was Bill Clinton.
He made incredible progress.
Yeah, if the Democrats reverted to a lot of Clinton policies, I think you guys would be in good shape. You'd have pretty strong arguments on many dimensions. But the party really left almost everything he believed in.
Under Jimmy Carter as well.
Look, I'm not suggesting that cutting taxes is a bad thing. I think cutting taxes is a perfectly great thing if you can also bring spending down, because otherwise you get a deficit blowout, you get a high interest burden, and then you get government spending, which on interest payments crowding out everything else, which is where we're headed right now.
100%, 100%. Like that point, the last point is the key. Your last point, Zach, is the key. This is what motivated Elon to get involved in politics is the debt burden times the interest rate is completely unsustainable. You just
Yes.
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
can't have 50% of U.S. tax revenues going to pay debt. Like that's just not going to work.
My guess is what you're really trying to do here as the Republican Party is you basically cut taxes. You know you're going to see a deficit blowout. The deficit is going to get worse and worse and worse, and eventually we're going to be faced with having to cut entitlements because we're forced to economically because we're going bankrupt.
It's an interesting question because this is where Trump is a non-traditional Republican. The traditional Republican view might be very consistent with that, but he is not. He's very pro entitlement in actually many ways that are inconsistent with the conservative ideology that I grew up with. And so it's not going to happen under Trump. Like we're not cutting entitlements. Like he ran in 2016, 15. He just believes in like entitlements in a way that traditional conservatives have never really embraced. So it's going to take a different Republican leader, per Kevin's point, who has a different ideology to follow that strategy.
I think we've got neither party. And I have to admit, it is hard to criticize Trump and then also be like, but I'm not actually supporting democratic ideas either, because I think they're both bad. Because everybody always assumes they're like, oh, do you love the? And like, no, it's just they're both morons. One is a little crazier than the other group, but like, no party has even remotely come close to talking about how they're going to cut entitlement spending. And if you look at federal government expenditures between Medicare, Medicaid, military, Social Security, and interest payments, that's like 80% of
I think
all
maybe
spending.
higher. I think it's 90 or something.
So what would
There's
you do?
nothing
So
else.
yeah. So what's your like seriously, like what's your proposal? Given that I agree with the facts, what do you think we should do?
Oh, increase taxes.
Well, that's just gonna
go with increased taxes. I'm not
that's
going to
gonna
go with
paper
increased
over
taxes.
the problem.
Zach, let's not forget, we did it under Clinton and the deficit shrank. We did it under Obama and it started heading in the right direction. We don't want to have too much taxation, but we can have a fair amount. Wealthy people should pay tax.
100%.
So wealthy people do. The top 1% pays 50% of all taxes in the United States.
Obviously, because they have more than 50% of the wealth, Keith. The question
I know, but
is
that's crazy. That's like crazy. Like nobody should be. The reason why we have the reason we have this debt, like the reason why is we took away the principle that everybody needs to contribute. So you have a majority of the population saying, "Hey, just take money from Keith and give it to me." And that's what that's what the Federalist Papers warned about. This is a 400-year-old problem. You cannot have 80% of the American people not paying for government spending. We need to cut taxes on wealthy people, and we need to make sure that everybody pays their fair share, which means that they feel the burden. Like, so if you want to increase government spending, everybody, like every friend and family member I have, should feel some pain when we increase government spending, and that creates a natural deterrent.
Neither of these are going to work, and we can talk about kind of like a variety of reasons why. And Keith, I will answer your question of like what I would do if I could like wave a magic wand. The challenge on raising taxes to cover spending is two things. One, there is no amount of tax increases that you can put on the American people that will come anywhere close to covering entitlement spending. It's just a tax on it's. We're inching there now. The downside of raising taxes on Americans, wealthy Americans as well, is the substitute for where their money would normally go. So if you take $50 that someone like me has, I don't just like stick $50 in a bank account, in a checking account and earn interest. I invest it. And that investment goes into public and private companies, mostly in the United States. And that investment causes growth. The only way to fix the US deficit over time is to grow your way out of it. And taxing people that invest their money shrinks growth over the long run. And there's these incredible stats. I wish I had it over here, where like if you harm growth by like even 0.1, 0.2% year over year, that shit compounds. And you harm yourself in the future for a very small short-term blip. So like, do I think wealthy people could pay slightly more? They already do pay one of the highest tax rates in the globe. Like we pay a lot of taxes. Absolutely. Does that come anywhere close to solving the entitlement problem? No. The issue is in entitlements. And what you've got are a few of these things, Social Security being probably the biggest one here, which is we set a Social Security system up as a pyramid, right? Like we have younger people essentially who pay in to afford what we give to older people. And we set the system up at a time when people were dying at like 75. And like we didn't
and birth rates were replacing those deaths at a more material rate.
and both of those are broken.
Kevin, I'm curious on your entitlement side though. Would you would just go tax and keep entitlements as they are if you could pick something?
By the way, sorry, one last thing on entitlements. I just want to be clear. Social Security is a designed Ponzi scheme by design, right? It's basically the younger gen pays for the older gen. And that Ponzi scheme you can run, sorry to cut you off, can run forever if the younger generation is growing from a population size and it is no longer growing. So like simple things that make sense in today's age, raise the retirement age. People don't need to, you live till you're 90 now or 85. Like it's insane that we keep you at 65 because all we're doing is we're taxing young people to give it to old people.
Kevin, I want to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah. So one point I want to make is that, so in the year 2000, tax revenue in the United States was 28% of GNP. Today it's 25%. If we went back to just 28%, through a variety of ways, 3% is an enormous impact of GNP every year. And it solves a huge part of our problem. And just going back in 2000, we didn't feel like everyone was being completely overtaxed. By the way, the economy had done extraordinarily well in the 90s. The stock market was at an all-time high. Things were booming.
Well, yeah, but as your point, we did crash in 2000, 2001, 2003, 2004, and into 2005, partially because of that.
Not because of tax revenue, no.
I think it was. Like, why do you think the market collapsed? I mean, you have to have some cause.
No one has ever argued that it's because the tax burden was too high in 2000.
Tax plus regulation burden led to the market collapsing. And we went through, in tech, we went through a recession, like maybe a depression.
Tech absolutely did.
Yeah, but I just did the math real fast, and it looks like 3% of whatever 30 trillion. It's still only 900 billion or something. So
It's not 30 trillion. It's not 30 trillion. It's not 30 trillion. The United States government tax receipts are about $5 trillion a year, of which half, about 2.5 trillion, are income tax related. So even if you increase income tax by that 3% difference, you're talking about like 70-80 billion dollars. It doesn't make a dent. The math doesn't work. You cannot tax your way out of a spending problem beyond the shrinkage.
You did the calculation on the federal budget, not on the GNP.
I get it, but I'm just talking about like if you assume that income tax-ish goes up about 3%, roughly, right? Because we're already at crazy high tax rates for most people.
But that wasn't what Kevin said. Kevin said 3% of GNP. It's a different
3% GNP.
Okay, but then you're talking about raising tax.
I agree.
No, but that's the point, Keith. That's where we were in 2000.
But it's
I
still
know
only
we had a
$900
5-year
right?
depression. We had a 5-year depression in
because of that.
tech. Well,
we absolutely do not have
tell
it
me
because
some. Well, give me some other cause. But let me give you a stat that's similar to yours that I think you'd agree with.
Yeah, guys.
If you roll back government spending,
GDP shrinks. GDP shrinks. That's why that number is high. It's not a good number. It is a bad number. You want to look at the absolute dollars that you take in because you have to take in dollars to spend them. And tax increases just do not take in enough dollars based on how much we spend. And it's because we have an aging It's not rocket science. We have an aging population that we keep healthy longer. And we have a shrinking younger population to support that aging population. And that shape of that curve is the single largest part of our deficit. There's nothing you can do besides change that curve.
well, you're totally right. Now, there's a couple of techniques you could try to change that curve. Kevin, if you hold federal government spending to 2019 levels, so not that long ago, as you would say, not that different. It wasn't like the society was completely broken in 2019. We already have enough tax revenue to pay for everything that was in the federal budget in 2019. So we just have to go back to 2019. That's like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. How difficult should that be?
Well, I think all of us would be in favor of a well-done DOGE, which they're not doing at all. If they just did a comprehensive look at every department and said, look, we're going to cut 5% here, 10% here, 15% in some cases, everyone would be supportive of that.
It doesn't work. It doesn't work. You cannot cut the federal government because it's not the federal government that's spending the money on its own people. It's entitlement spending. This is like congressionally mandated spending.
So the DOGE was a good idea. Raising taxes selectively for wealthy people is a good idea. And entitlement reform absolutely has to happen. So completely agree.
So can we get people? Can we get people to voluntarily start opting out of Social Security? Is that possible?
I think if the younger generation understood that they are essentially funding the retirements of older people and will not get their money back, they would freak the fuck out. But nobody actually understands how any of this stuff works because it all sounds like free money to you because you don't see it exactly in your tax bill. It's not. But when we tax younger people, and it's not just young, I mean like working age people, that's 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s. And we say to you, you're going to fund essentially the retirement of older people. And the chances that you get the amount of money that you put in are basically zero.
But Zach, Social Security is the easiest. It's the easiest thing to change because you can move the retirement age. We've done it in the past. If we move it up 3 years, a huge percentage of the problems go away.
Absolutely. I would love to raise to 3 years.
Medicaid and Medicare are much tougher.
You can means test it, right? You can means test based on like, okay, you only receive certain benefits based on your actual income and wealth at that point in time. We've got a giant military budget that I'm sure could have trimmed 20, 30%.
I don't know about that. We can talk about the military separately, but
I think the reality of all of this stuff is leaving Social Security. I do agree Social Security is the easy one. It's kind of the low hanging fruit, and the rest are much, much tougher. You have to grow your way out of it. The only way to do this is to grow your way out of it. And
100%.
that is where the Democratic Party is a disaster because it only thinks in short term. It doesn't think in long-term growth. And the current Republican Party, fentanyl, thing aside, it also is a disaster because it's shrinking growth. It's the only way to do it.
We're not shrinking growth. We're going to grow. So there's a stat
You
that's
just shrank it last quarter.
No, it did not. Q1 was a positive growth. You can adjust for your imports and like you get this fake real GDP, to be very explicit, grew in Q1. No doubt. There's no debate about that. Objective fact, real GDP defined in Econ 101 grew in Q1 and it's going to grow in Q2. I don't know what's going to happen in Q3. Like, I admit you guys might be right.
But this setup, this is part of why I'm always surprised when people don't understand this, because this is like what I'm talking about is not like some random it's Europe. Like you can just go across the ocean and look at exactly what Europe does, which is essentially where America is trending, leaving some of our, thank God, like, states' rights. We don't have like too many insane regulatory issues, but you've got entitlement spending going to retirees and other benefits. And then you regulate and tax the shit out of your population so they can't grow. And you've got spending goes like this and growth kind of peters off and then your tax revenue shrinks and none of it works. And so I just hope at some point, some politician is like, hey, it'd be awesome. 5% growth, 6% growth. Like, how do we get back to that?
So that should be the intellectual strategy of both Republicans and Democrats. Like, I think rallying around a 5% growth target. So from 1950 to 2010, on average, in every decade, we had a growth that was impressive at that level, 3.7 years in every decade. Since 2010, we've had exactly 2 years of 4% or more growth, and one was post-COVID, which wasn't a real growth. So once in the last 15 years have we grown at the rate we used to grow almost 40% at.
By the way, during the 50s and 60s, we had taxes that were so much higher on the wealthy and we grew much faster.
No, stated tax rate. Like, like that was not what the rate that people were paying. There were so many exemptions and so many deductions. Like, look at the fraction of GDP if you want. Tax rate as a fraction of GDP is a good way to kind of get a real
you also
barometer.
Have like industrialization of the entire world helping to grow. It's kind of like
because we had an open economy.
It still continued in the 80s, in the 70s, even stagflation decade. We had actually a couple of years of real growth in the 70s. So this is a modern problem. The cause is the Federal Reserve printing money plus this terror. They're terrorized of the idea that growth means inflation. And if the government spending goes up and we are growing, that could cause inflation. If you suppress government spending a little bit, even 1 or 2%, you have room to grow without triggering inflation. And we need to get to that 5% growth rate. The debt burden will not be a serious problem if we're growing sustainably in the 4 to 5% range.
If we all just sat down and said, hey, what are barriers to entrepreneurship, barriers to new business starts, barriers to business growth, to investment, to all the things that ultimately grow the private economy of the United States, we would be in great shape. But all we're doing right now is bitching about getting cheap stuff from our international trade partners, which, by the way, is a good thing for growth because a lot of those cheap things we get from them is input to things that we make. And then we bitch about taking this pie as if it's like some fixed pie and divvying it up, as opposed to trying to think about like, how do we make this bigger? And it's just like the wrong problems. We're focused on like all the wrong things. I hope eventually Trump and the administration gets back to things like regulatory reform so we can grow our way out.
But they are doing regulatory reform. It's not covered as much in the media for a variety of reasons. Secondly, Obama, to give him credit, one of the best things we did to propel growth was the qualified small business exemption. So we brought capital gains down to effectively zero. If we want to propel growth, the capital gains tax rate should go to zero or pretty close to it. And then we could propel growth. We'd have risk reward equations that make sense for investing in breakthrough science, like a lot of benefits. So I think there's a fair amount we can do there. And Obama was very progressive in that dimension. The second thing is that Trump really does want to grow. Like this is that there. Forget about there's a geopolitical strategic problem with the CCP. You can, and reason. Let's say we got rid of tariffs on every other country. We still have a CCP problem, and we have a supply chain that is very threatened. Like we can't do pharmaceuticals in the United States.
You can.
We don't
no,
have.
but you can.
We don't currently have the capability to produce.
To be clear, the vast majority of on-market pharmaceutical products, meaning this is a drug that is now approved and ready for manufactured scale to be distributed to like actual patients. It's not in China. It's not in China.
It's not
we
in the
have
United
facilities.
States.
No, we do actually. We do have facilities in the United States, but yes, generally speaking, you have them in Canada, you have them in Europe. We have manufacturing facilities all across the globe. We don't actually have to make these things in China. There's a different issue in pharmaceuticals in China, which is more about them like stealing IP and theft. But this idea that like the pharmaceutical supply chain is really like China, as we're making all of these in China, like it's really not true. The Chinese do make a whole bunch of generics, absolutely. But you know who else is great at making generics? Indians. Israelis.
Great. Well,
right?
I'm glad we're going to have this great deal with India and Israel.
Because the pharmaceutical industry already is aware that reliance on China from a manufacturing standpoint is a challenge, and it is diversifying no matter.
Yeah, we learned that during COVID for a variety of reasons.
Tariffs. You don't need tariffs to do this. The industry is going to do it.
So we have consensus. We're going to fix that. That's great. Then, secondly, we do need rare mineral supply. Like everything we use, our phones, our cars, depend upon.
The Chinese control, and I'm not going to butcher all the actual minerals, but like the Chinese control like 2 or 3 rare earth minerals where they truly have like 80-90% of the supply. And that's just because they've been flooding the market with it cheaply, which is great for us in the short run, right? Because it's a cheap input to shit we make. Now, is it a bad thing if like they can't give it to us in the future or really they refuse to? Sure. But these things are not unique to China's geography. It's just that they've been flooding it from a mining perspective. So like,
well, some are more unique and some are environmentally sensitive in the United States to extract.
There will be global miners that pick up the slack. It's like gallium and I can't remember the exact names, but there's really only like 2 that are truly unique to China, and they exist in other countries. Like that will be it's a red herring. It's not a real thing. The global mining world will pick up the slack if China pulls back. It's just that they've been doing it in this really, really cheap way. So we kind of benefit from the fact that they're willing to subsidize Americans.
What are we going to do about this? So you don't want to use tariffs. So what are we going to do to stop the subsidization? Like until they stop the subsidization, the slack can't be picked up by people because they're going to have to charge.
We should talk about whether this subsidization is a bad thing.
We benefit.
We benefit.
Well, we benefit in the short term, but dependency on 2 or 3 minerals that are critical to everything we do is a serious geopolitical.
Yes,
imagine we were dependent. Imagine we were dependent on Hamas for 2 or 3 critical ingredients.
Yeah,
like we can't have that happen.
Okay, so like instead of treating China as if it's like one individual factory, if you like actually used your brain as the American government, you would sit and figure out, okay, which critical minerals.
Go buy mines in Argentina. Go to Africa.
They're definitely doing this. Finally, like this is a serious.
But I think it's important.
It doesn't get headlines, but this is probably in the top 3 priorities for the administration. Is like
Along
going literally mineral by mineral by mineral
because
and finding serious fentanyl in supply chain. Like that's what this administration cares about. Don't believe what you read in the stupid New York Times. It's all fake news.
They couldn't even name the top 10 minerals they care about. They probably can't even pronounce.
They absolutely can.
I bet you if they typed them in a press release, they'd have spelling errors. Like that's how stupid these people are.
If a journalist today asked Marco Rubio or JD Vance to name the top 10 minerals and where they're found and how exposed we are, they would get the answer dead on perfectly. Better than you, me, or Kevin combined.
I would love that 30-minute special where like they're unprepared for that question and we would just gamble on it. Like
No,
that
these
would be
people
amazing.
These people really know what they're doing. Like,
I also, by the way, I'm
you're-
glad you did pick. I have to give you credit. You did pick the only two people in that administration who have like half a brain. When Besson, I put him in that bucket
Besson
too.
also knows the
Yeah,
answer
I'd
to
put
all
him in
these
that-
questions
yes, yeah.
cold. And it not they don't have to prepare. They know the answer is cold, and they
But
would,
at some point we have to admit that like China and it's other countries too, but like China subsidizing cheap shit for us. If that cheap shit is not unique to China and is not in some like military supply chain, is actually a pretty good thing for growth in Americans. We're basically
it's like a tax cut. It's an enormous tax cut
paid for by the Chinese people.
Yeah.
Because
I'm glad you guys found a tax cut you like. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like everyone's like, oh, they produced all these cheap solar panels. Like, how bad is that? And I'm like, do you want cheap solar panels or do you not want cheap solar panels? Like, I don't understand what the argument is. Are you saying the US, by the way, if the US wants to produce solar panels at the scale and price that the Chinese do, we also have to subsidize it, which means we take US taxpayer money and spend it on subsidization of solar panel manufacturing. Why don't we just buy the cheap shit from China? Like, that seems a lot better for the US from a growth perspective. And then the argument is always, oh, well, what if we get in a war and they like knock out our solar panel supply? I'm like, I don't think supply of solar panels is going to be mission critical to the war in China. Like,
no, well, that's
like,
true. But
like,
now let's take a more complicated, neutral example, like auto manufacturing. So China has created from scratch in the last 15 years.
They illegally subsidize their some of their auto manufacturing infrastructure.
And that has caused significant challenges to American automotive manufacturers. And that
Kind
leads
of.
to
Like
arguably, I mean, it's complicated, I admit, but certainly they feel the pressure, like GM, Ford, etc., because of these cheap.
Yes, the Chinese state subsidize some, at least historically, state subsidize some of the auto manufacturing capabilities in the nation. And so as a result, they can invest more. Again, they're taking Chinese taxpayer money. Let's be clear about how they do this, right? Like, that is coming out of the pockets of Chinese people. So it's not free. And they give it essentially to the auto manufacturers. And theoretically, also, they're also pretty good at manufacturing. Like, they produce cheaper cars than we can produce. Now, we do tariff slightly in an intelligent way Chinese autos. That's why you don't see like Chinese autos in the United States. We do protect our domestic industry.
Right. But right. But so this is a good illustration where we have made a decision to use tariffs to avoid the subsidization.
It's surgical tariff on autos. Yes. And by the way, the Europeans do the same thing, right? Because, you know, if you look at like Germany's economy, I mean, like, what percentage of it is auto manufacturing? Like 20% of their economy. So they also strategically tariff these cars, raise the prices. And that's why you see the Chinese autos kind of gaining share in third world countries and others, because they want the cheap cars. Now, this is the trade we are making. And we just have to be honest about it, which is like the starting car price in the United States for like an intro car, I think we talked about this at one point, plus the fact that we layer in all these like fuel economy standards and whatnot, is pretty expensive. It's like 28 grand, 30 grand. And the Chinese can make that same car 15 like that. So the US consumer pays like a 70, 80, 90% tax. They don't realize it because the equivalent cheap car we could have gotten, we do not offer. And in return for that tax on all American consumers, we basically keep our auto industry, or some of our auto industry that we might have lost. I mean, we wouldn't have lost all of it. Maybe we would lose like the entry level.
We would have lost a reasonable amount. Like NAFTA caused a significant loss, as an example.
This is really a China issue. Like, this has nothing to do with North America. This is like a Chinese subsidization. There aren't really other auto manufacturers besides China who can do this on the cheap. Like, they're kind of the only ones. The rest of these manufacturers are basically US and European companies. And you don't want to get in one of these like Indian manufactured cars. Like, that's not a safe thing to be in. Is that the trade we're making? Yes. Do people understand that they're giving up, you know, $10,000, $15,000 on an entry level price car because we don't allow you to buy the Chinese vehicle? So it's just a taxpayer shift from like the consumer to basically auto workers in Detroit. And I'm okay with that.
So you're okay with that, but then why are you not okay with it in other industries?
Because we view auto manufacturing as like a critical strategic input because the same skills to produce autos or produce vehicles for the military, it becomes like a critical skill set that you need here. That, I guess, is a reasonable argument. And that's why it's like a surgical tariff.
And we already have
autos.
also, we have millions and millions of jobs. But I think it's debatable whether we should be doing it as aggressively as we are.
And fine, like I'm fine, lay out all the products and be like, which of these, if we lost our supply, would we be an absolute disaster? And by the way, where we lost the supply specifically because China controls it, because they're not our ally, right? If we have European allies and allies in Canada and India and Mexico, like, unless you think we're going to war with our allies, you shouldn't be worried about supply chains that exist in Europe and Canada and Mexico. You should be excited about those supply chains.
One of the downsides is that we have, in theory, we have a tax, but we actually just ban them. So we get no revenue. So normally when you have a tariff, you actually get revenue. That is the one potential benefit. And I think here we have the worst of all worlds.
Yeah, I agree. Like we should just at least let them enter a little. The better argument, I think, is that they kind of don't let us sell our cars there in any real way. And so it's like a tit for tat type of thing. I think that's more reasonable, but it's a slippery slope, right? Because like tariffing cheap subsidized good by other countries is just a tax on the American consumer. And that's the trade that we make. And so like, I'm not sure when you get outside of autos and maybe military that it's a great idea. And I go back to the solar panel example, right? Like cheap solar.
Do you want to pay $2,600 for a US made iPhone or $3,000?
If the argument is this good or mineral, if we don't protect American industry, is going to be exclusively manufactured by like China and Russia or North Korea. They don't manufacture anything besides stealing Bitcoin. Like it's really those two countries, right? It's really China and Russia.
And Russia hardly manufactures anything.
Yeah, and Iran doesn't make anything, like they're kind of like oil nations, right? So it's really just China. Fine. Let's go like one by one of what are the industries that the Chinese are subsidizing that we care about having a supply chain. But that is not what we are doing.
It's not what the Trump administration is doing.
No, and it's because they're too stupid to think about this stuff and think it through. And so like this idea that like we're going to bring back all these jobs, it's like it's just not going to happen. And
well, we're going to bring
ourselves.
We're going to bring back jobs. They're going to be different, and I think that's an important distinction that gets lost.
They're going to be automated. They're going to be automated by nature.
Yes, no, you're 100% right. They're going to be automated, but building an automated factory takes a lot of trade. You need plumbers, you need electricians at scale with skills.
By the way, we already need plumbers and electricians.
We're 100,000 short. We're 100,000 short.
But that's my point. Is like we don't need this shit. We don't need this shit to hire plumbers.
Sounds like we need more immigration. If we had more immigration, Zach, we would solve this problem.
Well, no, we don't want to import them. We need to train. we need to have trade. We need to reduce the stigmatization on Tradecraft, first of all, because I think there is an ideological stigmatization. Secondly, I think we need to reallocate educational dollars to trade schools. These are jobs that, like, for example, the chip plants we're building in Arizona will pay between $75K and $125K without overtime for these Tradecrafts. These are great jobs. We don't have to go back to necessarily building textile.
And they're having trouble finding people. They can't
find trouble finding people.
There's a skill gap. Like we need to train people, but we need to also develop programs.
But you can't believe these two things are true at the same time. You can't believe that we have a shortage of skilled labor in the United States in things like plumbing, electricians, and construction, where we actually we have plumbers making $120,000, $130,000, $140,000. Electricians are making, you make over 200 grand as a good electrician in the US. We have a shortage of this labor. And so but the more factories
you bring, the easier it is. No, immigration.
No, it just exacerbates the shortage. It just
No, we need to reallocate people from being English major.
Who are these people you're reallocating?
Well, all these people that go to third-tier colleges that default on their debt, they're not getting an education.
Okay. Well, first of all, the federal government should not be in the business of deciding which job you should have. Let's get away from
of course not. But then, okay, I'm glad you agreed that the federal government shouldn't spend any money on education. Then that's a great idea, because once you start spending money, you're basically deciding we're prioritizing this job or this career.
I just think the argument. Sorry, and I will be quiet. The argument of we need to bring back more of these jobs that we already have a labor shortage in. It's just, these are not, you can't believe both of those at the same time.
This was a fantastic healthcare episode, guys. I'm glad we got into the nuances of healthcare and system. I think if we're going to do this again, I'm going to get a control of a mute button, and we're we're gonna figure this out. This was really fun and a lot of good intellectual debate. But
well, it will lead into healthcare. It will lead into healthcare because if you think about healthcare as like entitlement spending,
I agree.
and you think about healthcare
we
as
talked
like a
about
supply of
tariffs
doctor
and
issue.
pharmaceuticals. And
We talked about pharmaceuticals. We talked about, eating the comfort food that leads to coronary
yeah,
disease.
we got close on some of this stuff. I think I just need a mute button. I was trying to figure it out about part of the way through. So that's for another time. But all right,
You're
guys.
like, how do I mute these assholes? Like,
It was really you mostly, but yeah.
Keith gets me worked up in the morning. I'm just like, I wasn't
Who
ready to
needs
argue.
coffee when we have Keith and Zach going back and forth here?